Some very sad news, I'm afraid. Waleed Daqqa, a Palestinian political prisoner, has just passed away. And he spent 40 years of his life in prison with the Israeli jackboot on his neck. And he died because of medical negligence. This is a strategy that the Israelis employ on the people they have kidnapped, the hostages, whereby they deny them essential, critical medical attention, knowing full well that they shall perish were they not to receive it. You know, this whole thing about October 7 with the hostages. Israel has hostages, and one of them has just died. So Waleed Daqqa was arrested in 1986 because he killed an Israeli soldier, which is a legal act of resistance. He was arrested in 86, and he should have been released in 93. So since 93, he has been a hostage. What else do you call a man who is held in prison arbitrarily without charge or trial and has already been given his freedom? He is a hostage. That goes for all the Palestinians that are held by this occupying illegal army. Waleed Daqqa is a towering figure in the Palestinian resistance. Last year, they killed Khadr Adnan, both of them because of medical negligence, and many others. What about these hostages? Huh? Let me read to you a little bit about Waleed Daqqa. Palestinian detainee Waleed Daqqa was martyred inside Harofeh Hospital on Sunday following a nearly 4 decade long struggle in Israeli occupation prisons. Throughout his imprisonment, Daqqa endured numerous forms of mistreatment, torture, and most notably, medical negligence. This comes shortly after the human rights group Amnesty International called on quote-unquote Israel to release Daqqa on humanitarian grounds on Saturday. The rights group affirmed that the Palestinian detainee had suffered torture, humiliation, lack of family visits, and medical neglect, particularly since the start of the Israeli war on Gaza on October 7th. On March 13th, the Palestinian Prisoner Society, PPS, announced that the cancer-stricken detainee had been transferred to Harofeh Hospital as his health further deteriorated following deliberate medical negligence. His family made an urgent appeal for his release, citing his critical health situation. The family said that Daqqa should be at the top of the list of detainees in the first upcoming exchange deal, given his deteriorating medical conditions. So his family were saying that Daqqa should be released. He should be at the top of the list when there's a future hostage exchange between Hamas and the Zionist occupiers. Daqqa's case was considered the most critical among these seriously ill Palestinian detainees. His wife, Sana, has constantly reiterated to Al-Mayadeen that the Israeli occupation is deliberately subjecting her husband to the policy of systematic medical negligence in an attempt to assassinate him. Yes, yes. You see, with Khadr Adnan, he was on hunger strike, not his first. And after going through multiple hunger strikes, your body, it can't take all of that. And the Israelis, this is not just with Khadr Adnan. This is Khadr Adnan. That's his photo. He was killed last year. But with all of the prisoners who go on hunger strike, the Israelis will wait till you're on your last legs. You're like this close, a fraction, a millimeter away from being gone, until they transfer you to a medical center where you again don't get the proper amount of care that you deserve as a human being. We all know Israel doesn't exactly respect anyone's human rights, do they? Khadr Adnan, by the way, was associated with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, with PIJ. But back to Waleed Daqqa. Who is Waleed Daqqa? He was born in the town of Baqqa al-Gharbiyya in northern occupied Palestine in 48. He joined the ranks of the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, in 1983, and was assigned to a military cell on the front. Alongside his comrades in the PFLP, Daqqa conducted a series of operations against Israeli occupation forces and took captive Moshe Tamam, an Israeli soldier. He was detained 2 years later and initially received a death sentence, which was later reduced to 37 years in prison. In 2018, the Israeli occupation added another 2 years to his sentence on charges of smuggling phones to prisoners to help them communicate with their families. 2 extra years in prison because you helped people communicate with their families. A few years ago, his wife was able to give birth to their daughter, Milad, after smuggling his sperm from prison. Upon discovering this, Israel imposed harsh penalties on Daqqa, admitting him to solitary confinement and restricting his visitation rights. So without conjugal visits, without any family visits, or not enough anyway, they isolated him mentally and physically, deprived him of a normal family life, and punished him for having a child. And how did he do this? He was put in a position where he had to resort to smuggling his own sperm out of prison. If that isn't tragic, I don't know what is. Daqqa is considered one of the most prominent writers and thinkers of the Palestinian captive movement. Daqqa is considered one of the most prominent writers and thinkers of the Palestinian captive movement. Israel punished him for his resistance, denying him access to proper medical care and early release despite his declining health. His continued... Now I'm going to show you that not only did they violate his human rights by denying him medical attention, by putting him in solitary confinement, by torturing him, but on top of that, the Israelis violated the peace process with the Palestinians, the Oslo Accords. Daqqa's continued detention contradicted the 1993 Oslo Accords, which included a provision for the release of all Palestinian detainees held before the agreement was signed. During his detention, Daqqa was denied the opportunity to bid farewell to his father before his passing or to visit his mother, who suffered from Alzheimer's a decade ago. Again, this is so gut-wrenching to read. The level of evil that the Israelis inflict on others is so unnecessary and so criminal and outrageous and egregious that it's beyond the pale. It's incomprehensible. I can't digest it. I can't accept it. And speaking of the release of prisoners, this is similar to the Good Friday Agreement between the British government and the IRA, where they said, okay, all the Irish prisoners can go free. Some of them had double life sentences. I think one of them had 11 life sentences, and they went free because that's the deal. And so Israel violated the peace process from the first second. And then, of course, we know they started building more illegal settlements. They were never interested in peace. All they cared about was outsourcing the occupation and giving a semblance of peace. Despite being mentioned in 4 previous prisoner exchange deals, Daqqa was excluded. Additionally, he was unable to leave prison to meet his daughter Milad, who used to accompany her mother to protests advocating for her father's release. Daqqa endured acute pneumonia and renal failure, leading to surgery on April 12, 2023, during which a significant portion of his right lung was removed. Subsequently, he faced complications from the surgery, along with severe respiratory issues and infection. Despite restrictions such as book bans, Daqqa attained bachelor's and master's degrees while in prison. Additionally, he authored novels, articles, and poems about the Palestinian resistance against the Israeli occupation, which gained global recognition. Again, this is a very sad day. We have lost a hero of the resistance, a freedom fighter, a resistance fighter, a person who actually believes in democracy, who actually cares about achieving results, who actually will go and fight the oppressor. This man is to be respected above all other men who conduct and prosecute wars to kill civilians. What honor do they have? What value do they have? What contribution have they given to society? What contribution have they made to society? Waleed Daqqa is a freedom fighter. Khadr Adnan is a freedom fighter. And there are many others like them in prison without even knowing why. In this case, Daqqa was told. Khadr Adnan wasn't. You just go to jail. Like that. And you don't know why. It's secret. This is such an evil system. And it makes me all the more ashamed that Britain wrote these laws. These are British laws being employed, being put into action by the Israelis. How shameful. What have we done? What have we done? Look what we've done to the world. Look what we have done to the world. And just to further underscore his notoriety and his legendary status as a Palestinian resistance fighter, all the major factions issued statements mourning his passing. The PFLP described the martyr as the revolutionary leader, affirming his status as one of the prominent figures, leaders, and thinkers of the Palestinian captive movement. They also added that he was one of the most prominent symbols of prison literature and contributed significant intellectual and literary studies to the Palestinian, Arab, and international libraries. Hamas also mourned Daqqa and stressed in a statement that it renews its covenant to the detainees until they achieve freedom. Hamas head of the Office of Martyrs, Wounded, and Prisoners pointed out that the crimes of Israeli Police Minister Ben-Gvir against the detainees, the last of which was the martyrdom of Waleed Daqqa, are an attempt to thwart the efforts of the mediators and place obstacles in front of them. So you see how Waleed Daqqa is directly related to the entire October 7 war, the efforts to liberate the detainees and the prisoners from this arbitrary illegal detention. Similarly, here they also write that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement, PIJ, said Daqqa's martyrdom inside the Israeli occupation's prisons made him a living embodiment of the suffering experienced by Palestinian detainees in prisons. The PIJ pledged to spare no effort to liberate the detainees from the Israeli occupation prisons. With his martyrdom, the number of Palestinian detainees killed in Israeli occupation prisons since the start of the war on Gaza now stands at 14 and at 251 since 1967.